about our container agreements for this space. So I'm sure most of y'all are familiar with concepts of like group agreements and things like that. The idea here that we're going to talk about today is that we want to be really clear that when we are speaking, we speak from personal experience, right? So using the I statements, if you've been to therapy, you're probably really familiar with that. We want to honor the expertise in the room, right? Everybody here is an expert in their own experience, in their own life, and in these systems that we are navigating every day. Is this better? Thank you. Oh, this is y'all are lovely. Thanks for looking out. Um, we also want to make sure that we are expecting and accepting non-closure. When we have these conversations about power, we have conversations about identity, we have to remember that like it's not going to get wrapped up in a neat little bow. That's not how this works, right? This is an in-depth and ongoing work. And it's again, I'm going to talk about intersections of identity later, but like depending on your proximity to power and privilege, you may have a little bit longer time that you're going to have to sit with some things and work through some things. And that's okay, because that's part of the work that we do every day. We want to listen to understand, right? We're not here to challenge. We're not here to respond. Thank you. Oh, it's like, what are we? Okay. We want to challenge ideas and not people. Everyone in here has their own experience. One of the things I've learned doing this work over the last few years, right, is that kind of low key, everybody has lived experience of something, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be about homelessness, right? Most of us have lived experience of homelessness in this space, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing we got lived experience of either, right? And so we want to remember that. We are here to recognize impact over intent. This is a big one. I find very often when they're like, oh, please make sure that people realize that like, oh, they didn't mean any harm by that. It's fine. You might not have meant harm, but if you caused harm, and part of what we're going to talk about today, right, is accountability. You may not have meant to cause harm, but if you do, being accountable to that harm is the only way that we can actually navigate and move forward in a way that honors everybody in the space. And we want to trust that we're all here to learn and grow. And the last one is leaning into discomfort, which I am big time doing right now because I thought I was far more prepared for this than I was today. But yeah, like again, we're talking about power, we're talking about identity, we're talking about things that are going to be hard, and maybe stuff comes up in this as we're doing this kind of work within the workbooks that are on your table. And so lean into that. Like, what can you learn from that discomfort, right? Because that is going to teach you far more than anyone on this stage ever could. So we are going to start talking about power, I think. Yeah. Power analysis framework. I'm going to try to go through this quick because I want y'all to have time, and we had a little bit of a late start. The big question here is what we're really trying to sit with in this space, right? Is like, how do we use the power that we do have to create the change in the world that we need, right? There's a quote by Angela Davis that says, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And what does that look like for us? So today, what we're trying to work through is thinking, where do we might have power that we don't know we have it? And how can we utilize that power to create pathways and open doors, right? Open spaces up for us to be here. Y'all hear me say a lot, like, I don't want a seat at your table, I want to build a new one. And so what we're doing today is interrogating how do we position ourselves, or how are we already positioned to be building those new tables together? So how do we use the power we have to create the world we need? So if we're talking about power, we want to talk about what is power. Power is the ability to influence outcomes, decisions, and systems. It is not inherently a good or bad thing. And I think that's something that we forget a lot. I know that was a lesson I had to learn. When I first understood that I was coming into power of my own and I was like being able to step into that, I was terrified because all I had known before was what power under felt like. All I had ever known was to be under someone else's power. Power had been abusive. Power had been trauma. Power had been horrifying. So when somebody pointed a mirror to me one day and said, you have this ability to influence spaces and people, I was like, no, I don't. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want that. It's scary. And in the way that a lot of people who maybe have a complexion similar to mine, it's also there's accountability with power. And that's a scary thing, right? Because you don't want to do the wrong thing and you don't want to hurt somebody, you don't want to cause harm. The thing we have to remember is that we all of us have power. And that was one of the things that I've learned through this work. We have power in different ways that we don't even consider, which is why I like wanted to build on this. So if you guys are familiar with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, they're amazing. They are an organization that leads the Undoing Racism trainings kind of nationally. They've been doing it for like 30 years. And this is kind of a growing on a framework that they created, actually. They started talking to us. They teach us about this idea of what systems act as a foot of oppression on people in poverty, on people experiencing homelessness, on Black folks, on people of color, on Arab people. What are the systems that act as a foot of oppression? And in Austin, when we were doing this work and going through that training, one of our awesome colleagues, Kiana, if you ever get to see her speak, do it. She's amazing. She came to our team and said, hey, we want to talk about, but what about the power of the role we have in the system? What is that power? Like, what is our power? And one of my colleagues and best friends now actually pointed out in that call one day, he said, I have the power of setting agendas. And it blew my mind. I never even considered setting an agenda to be something where you have power. But you set the agenda, you determine what's being discussed. If you're somebody who's the note taker in a room, for example, your internal biases, implicit biases are going to inform who you think is important enough to write down what they have to say versus what somebody else has to say. And when you don't realize that you're holding that power, you don't interrogate it, and then you fall into that trap of going along with like what our kind of unconscious biases are. And we aren't going to get into that today because we don't have time. But so when we think about power, it's all of these things, and everyone in this room has so much power that our systems do not want us to know that we have. Because when you bring people together, and we literally, our liberation is bound up in one another. And when we are doing this work alongside each other and recognizing where our power lies and leveraging that power together, we become far more powerful than these systems could ever hope to be. And that's why they don't want us to know we got it, especially people with lived experience that are coming in here trying to help. Because let's be very clear, this system is designed to exploit those of us with lived experience. It just is, you know? It just is. When I used to work with youth, I would tell them all the time, you got to know what your line is. You got to know what your boundaries are. When you come into this work, you have to understand, you have to take as much from the system as it's going to give you, because they're going to give you opportunity. They're going to make you feel real good, right? But you got to know where your lines are, because otherwise they're going to have you co-signing on stuff you don't believe in, right? And so that's part of why we also do this interrogation of our power. Yeah, and again, our lived experience is expertise and power, but that's not something I really need, I think, to tell this room. If you don't have lived experience in this room, though, of homelessness, that is something you need to hear. So pay attention to that part. Okay, so the systems that we navigate. Man, I wish my slides were better, y'all. I'm sorry. Thank y'all. I love y'all. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank y'all so much. Say again. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, so when we talk about these systems that we navigate, right? These systems that we are navigating are offering and giving us gatekeepers that are controlling access to resources, experts who are making decisions about our lives, systems that are rewarding compliance and punishing resistance. That's a big one. And our expertise is dismissed in favor of credentials pretty routinely, being closest to the problem, but we're farthest from the solution. Not in this room, though, and thank you to Donald and to NCH for creating spaces like this, right? The thing is that we do know these systems intimately. We know them. My friend Ziggy, who does YHDP work, came up with this concept of internal systems experts. And that changed my whole mind, changed my whole world, because it was like, right, we are experts because we have gone through these systems. We know from the inside, we know what it's like. We know where the gaps are. We know where these systems fail, right? And so we are people that are on the receiving end routinely of these power dynamics. Then you have this compounded weight, right? For those of us that are navigating multiple systems of oppression, if you're not familiar with Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, I recommend looking up intersectionality, just a beautiful ideology. And I think that what she was talking about in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, was the ways in which Black women faced both racism and sexism at work, right? She was a law student, she was studying, and she wrote this paper where she was saying, a Black man might face racism in the workplace, but he's not going to face sexism. A white woman might face sexism in the workplace, but she's not going to face racism. But a Black woman will face both racism and sexism. And I think that what's brilliant about that, and where Dr. Crenshaw is really leaning into the kind of intersections of oppression, right? There's also the idea of, what about the intersections of privilege? What about the intersections that you can leverage that proximity to power and privilege? And what does that look like? Because it does go both ways. Intersectionality goes both ways. For those of us who have experienced homelessness, but now are working in the field, when we are sitting across the table from a client, right, we hold the power in that room. We didn't used to hold the power when we were in that room because we were on the other side of the table, but now we do. And we also hold this memory and this trauma in this body of what it was to be right where they are. And that impacts the way in which we work with them, that impacts the way in which we show up. But it also means that the same way I'm always telling nice white ladies who are in power that, like,